What I saw as a physician was I'd been ripped off and I had been deceived into believing that my conventional training in medical school was the answer to care for people. And then when I changed my lifestyle and my diet, all these medical problems went away. And honestly, I was furious. How could lifestyle have this much of a positive impact on disease, and why isn't this information being told out there? What we found based on our 7 years of research for the National Science Foundation was first a biomarker called visceral fat, and it's the earliest expression of chronic disease that occurs in the human body. The very common observation that is out there, as you grow older, you grow worse, you become more diseased and less capable. The truth is, it is only the case because chronic disease is around. This isn't fear-mongering, this is reality. The conventional healthcare system is not warning people about this, except they're pushing hard statin drugs. They just give you those medicines and they're making a lot of money. If we can just get people eating healthy, Ben, I think we're going to have far better results than big pharma or conventional healthcare can ever compete with. Rather than spending your money on a fancy car, I would tell you, sell your car. Go get a cheaper car.
Your car's not going to get you healthy.
Yeah.
What are the 5 most common contributors to visceral fat?
That's a great question. So,
Dr. Sean O'Mara, my friend, welcome to the Keto Camp podcast.
Thanks, Ben. Really good to be here with you.
You got a nice glow, a nice tan, lying in the Miami sun here in Sunny Isles Beach, not too far from me. And you might be a Miami or a Florida resident really soon. Doc, I love the work you're putting out there. It is so good. You've got scans and data to back up the research. We're going to get into all of that. But you have such a unique history. You have done different paths and avenues throughout your career. And I'd love for you to just summarize the history of Sean and how you got to where you're at today, focusing on visceral fat, metabolic health, and making a dent in metabolic syndrome.
Sure. So I'll try to sum up my background. So my background is different, and I don't entirely understand exactly all the roles and the decisions and experiences that I had, but somehow they part of the makeup into explaining how Sean O'Mara got to the position that he is in today, which is trying to optimize, where my passion is optimizing human beings from a biological perspective. But I grew up in a normal family. My dad was a government worker in Washington, D.C., and I went through public schools, and I had to work my way through community college, saving money, and eventually did well enough in community college to get into Penn State. I studied law enforcement. I was really originally interested in law enforcement. My parents were hit by a drunk driver. My dad was killed. And so we all had to work. You know, we all took jobs. And it just forced us to grow up overnight. So I was making pretty mature decisions relatively early on in my life. And then I gradually transitioned from law enforcement to law school, where after working as a uniformed police officer, then getting involved in undercover narcotics work, and actually, you know, I was a drug agent when that show, really old show, Miami Vice, was coming on.
Wow.
And so, you know, I have that kind of a background, and then I left law enforcement to study law, and I became a criminal prosecutor, and I did that for 3 years. And I couldn't shake my interest along the way with a fascination of science and particularly medicine. I was very interested as a child in medicine, but I just kind of dismissed it. I wasn't, you know, particularly good at science or grades, but at that point in my life, I was mature and I was hungry. So I decided that I wanted to go back to college. I had to take all my sciences that I avoided as a college student, and after I'd practiced law for a while, I had to go back to take these, you know, post-baccalaureate classes in biology and physics and organic chemistry. And so I took a job working as a night watchman. I put on a polyester uniform after being a police officer and a prosecuting attorney, and I wore this polyester uniform at nighttime, and I sat and I studied. And all night long, I really wanted to go to medical school, and I did well enough in my grades and studying for the MCAT to get into medical school. So I was determined. I really saw what I wanted to do, and I pursued medicine. I got accepted to medical school, and then I got a scholarship to pay for medical school through the U.S. Army, and that set me on a course of work, in a military position that really allowed me to have entree into emergency medicine, and then eventually I was caring for. I became the outstanding physician of the year for the Army in 2004, and I got selected to provide care for President Clinton and Vice President Cheney and Secretaries of State Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. So lots of experience doing senior executive service for for our country, our leadership. And so I finished my obligation in the military. I set up a concierge medical company because I was very intrigued. Telemedicine was coming out that time. I was intrigued about the capacity for using hospital-grade medical gear outside the hospital in the setting of people's homes, so that I thought big. Other people were just kind of doing telemedicine through through a camera, and I thought, well, what if you had all the equipment if you could afford it? So I worked with about 5 other physicians, and we designed these ICUs in people's homes and even mini hospitals, and it was very extravagant. But in caring for those ultra wealthy people, I realized that they were at a disadvantage. They were very into their lifestyle, and I couldn't get them interested despite the fact I was, and using that medical gear to monitor them and kind of it was all pre-placed. And I thought, well, maybe we could get more value out of it in preventing a heart attack or a stroke. But there really wasn't much interest in that. They just wanted, it was crazy. They wanted a system in place when they had a stroke to respond, but nothing before to try to prevent that. And I found that fascinating. So ultimately, I abandoned my interest in concierge medicine medical practice. I'd met a young patient that was very healthy, and I had at that point just started to put on weight. I was about in midlife, 45, 48. I was becoming heavy, and I couldn't stop what was happening in my body. And this young guy told me about, at the time, it was called the Paleo diet. So I read about it. It just clicked in my, it's like you see something, it just made a lot of sense, and never heard about it. It seemed opposite of what we were taught in medical school. So I abandoned carbohydrates. And at the time, I was not only overweight, but I had a lot of medical conditions. But my encouragement, my desire to do the paleo diet at that time was really just to lose weight and try to get rid of this gut that was developing within me. And so I abandoned my chocolate milk that I was, skim milk that I was going around drinking, carrying it around. And I
started carrying that around?
I was. I kept this. I thought I was healthy. I had this gallon of milk in a plastic container. I'd shake up the chocolate milk. It was skim milk. It was awful. I mean, can you imagine today? But once I went paleo, cut out carbohydrates, not only did I lose weight, but I had been suffering restless leg syndrome, which is where you kick your legs all night long. Would keep my poor wife awake because I was constantly kicking. I had obstructive sleep apnea. I was snoring all night long, and I'd stop breathing and start gasping for breath and scare her half to death. She used to think I was choking on blankets, would rip them away from around my neck and things. And I had eczema, bleeding all over my sheets. I had esophageal reflux, so I was on lots of different medications to try to suppress the terrible heartburn. I had precancerous lesions in a condition called Barrett's esophagus, and I would have to literally be scoped every single 3 months in my life to be biopsied to try to catch the malignancy that was forecasted that I would be getting from Barrett's esophagus. And that was the treatment plan. Just wait for the cancer. And the surprising thing, as a physician, I went along with this. And I also had erectile dysfunction. I had an enlarged prostate. I was waking up 4 or 5 times a night to pee. When I peed during the day, it would dribble out of me. There was no real stream anymore. No sense of evacuation of my bladder, and I had carotid arteries that were obstructed, and I was developing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And so lots of medical conditions, and here I am going paleo. And what I noticed over the year in going on this low carb, eliminating carbohydrates and eliminating all processed foods, was all my medical conditions either went completely away or were substantially better. And I've shared this story before, and you'd think a lot of people would be very pleased with the fact that that happened. But what I saw as a physician was I'd been ripped off, and I had been deceived into believing that my conventional training in medical school was the answer to care for people. And the longer I followed my conventional training, what I learned in medical school, and accepted the conventional treatment that was provided to me, the worse off I became. And then when I changed my lifestyle and my diet, all these medical problems went away. And honestly, I was furious. I felt like I had been deceived, and I had been corrupted into a system that I realized was just propagating disease to make money. And so I was compelled at that time, because I felt like I was in a matrix or something. It was like a whole completely different sphere of insight that suddenly I was teleported into. And I felt obligated to become a researcher, to ask the question, to dare to ask the question, how could lifestyle have this much of a positive impact on disease, and why isn't this information being told out there? So I moved my family to Minneapolis, joined a research practice, and ended up getting a grant. We applied for funding from the National Science Foundation for the purposes of trying to and identifying strategies to reverse chronic disease for our country, which is a huge problem. It's chronic disease, in fact, is the largest problem that humanity faces. So I was excited to try to develop strategies to solve the largest problem. And I say it's the largest problem, and if you're listening, I think it's worth being aware about. You should think about problems. If while we're on the planet, we should be solving problems. And I find chronic disease to be the biggest, because no other problem do we spend more money on. No other part of it's the largest part of our economy. It's way larger than energy or defense or internet or banking or finances. It is the largest part of our economy, and is the largest part of the healthcare sector. And chronic disease, nothing else impairs worker productivity more, employee productivity more. Nothing impairs the quality of lives of humans more than chronic disease. And nothing kills more people than chronic disease. And yet, if you're listening, who's talking about this problem? Nobody. And so I think it's this enormous problem that's kept in the background. People aren't told about and don't think about. And so when I started to research this, I became even more interested in the enormity of the problem. And then we developed biomarkers to take a look at, if we're going to eradicate chronic disease, then we should be asking the question, what is relevant to chronic disease? What should we be taking a look at? So what we found based on our 7 years of research for the National Science Foundation was first a biomarker called visceral fat. And it's the earliest expression of chronic disease that occurs in the human body. So you should be wondering, what is the first expression of disease in the body, and when does it start? And the answer is visceral fat, and it begins in your childhood. So we would scan teenagers, adolescents, and including my own children. I was scanning them from the funding for the National Science Foundation. And as early as 4 years of age, we would see visceral fat present in small children. And the interesting thing is, to the extent that they consume a carbohydrate-rich diet, especially processed foods, we would see more of this visceral fat inside of them. And visceral fat led us to other biomarkers, fat around the heart, organ fat, within the organs, and then fat being deposited within the musculature of individuals, and then atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, clogged arteries. So as we study visceral fat, we paid attention to what caused it and what made it worse and what made it better. And we developed different strategies to try to impact it. And so that really led me up to where I am today. I became this passionate researcher, purposing to try to do the best I can to help people optimize their health and to eradicate chronic disease. And the last point I will share about my research here at the beginning is the fact that chronic disease went away when you got rid of visceral fat was not too much of a surprise. What really shocked me was how much human performance improved. So people looked better and they performed so much better across the board in everything that we measured or anything that they were involved in. They reported they became better at playing tennis, better at playing chess, better at whatever work they did professionally, better at sports. Everything improved. And so the fact that you can increase the performance in humans by eradicating disease gives me great hope that if we can leverage corporate America, employers, to become aware of the fact that if they're able to get their employees more healthy, there will be an exploitable advantage to them where their employees will literally become better employees for them, work better, increase productivity, and the fact that it also reduces healthcare costs that a lot of times are borne by very large corporations of 1,000 employees or more. So if you're listening today and you run a large self-insured company, I am looking for self-insured companies to work with to help educate them about this very significant advantage of getting your employees more healthy. But really, the same advantage applies to everybody. I think the message of optimizing health is a very attractive one and so relevant to every human that may be listening to this podcast.
Yeah, what a story. What a start. So for those watching on YouTube, in a minute here, we're going to show some photos to really take a deep dive into visceral fat and distinguish that between subcutaneous fat. And then we'll get into how to optimize and reduce the visceral fat so you're able to reverse these conditions or prevent them even better. So Doc, just a couple of follow-up questions on what you shared, and then we'll take a deep dive into visceral fat. Paleo diet is what you discovered. You mentioned that you did no carb paleo diet, so you did a different variation of it because from my understanding, paleo diet still involves carbs, just no processed carbs. So how did you do it?
Yeah, boy, what a great question. So what happened, Ben, was I went paleo, and it was really, I would call it low carb at that time.
But not keto, not low enough to be keto. Okay.
I later went keto, and there was this several step process in my kind of an evolution in my dietary strategies where I reduced carbohydrates, but I still was eating fruit and had vegetables and a higher level of carbohydrates than I do today. And then I found out about keto. Keto came on, and I was so good on paleo that I thought, well, keto, I don't know. I just didn't want to leave my old friend paleo because I had all my disease processes went away. But it made sense, that keto really had an appeal to me originally, and so I decided to adopt a more of a ketogenic lifestyle. I cut out carbohydrates even more, reduced my carbohydrate intake to certainly less than 50 grams a day and probably more closer to 25. And I had substantial improvement. I mean, I just got better. And so then after being keto for about 3 or 4 years, a friend of mine, Nick 𝙎𝙐𝙎𝙎𝙀, called me up and was talking to me about going carnivore and going zero carb.
When was this? What year?
This was 2009. So
2009.
Oh, so wait, sorry, not 2009. Sorry, 2000. This was 5 years ago. So it was 2019.
18, 19.
Yeah,
Okay, got it. That makes more sense
2000,
because
sorry.
Yeah, that would have been way ahead of the carnivore code.
Yeah, I was an OG in carnivore.
Yeah.
No, it definitely was. It
That's
was
still
right
pretty early
before-
on. I mean, now it's a lot more popular, but even 5 years ago, it's still pretty early.
Yeah,
early on.
it was right before it deployed. Nick told me about it, and I remember telling Nick, no, you gotta have those nutrients in plants, man. You just all meat, no, that doesn't seem right. It didn't seem right to me. But what happened was I bumped into Nick at Whole Foods, so he was calling me up and talking to me about this. Then I saw him at Whole Foods. Holy cow! Did he improve his appearance? And my hair stain, I'm like, dude, I'm in. Look at you. So I decided to give it a try. I figured I could always add back vegetables. And to this day, I still tell people, when I encourage them to give zero carb a try, you can always return, if you want in the future. It's not like this is set in stone. So I went zero carb carnivore back in right around 2018, 2019. And I stayed carnivore during my deployment in the military to the Middle East. And that was a little tricky, because, the military likes to, they would portion us out and we wouldn't get so much meat. I had to figure out ways to go sneak in and go get more meat. So, I could keep my intake of adequate protein in. And I just steadily got better, significantly better, going on carnivore. So a few times I would try to add back some carbohydrates through vegetables, complex carbs. And every time I did, Ben, I would experience joint pain, back pain. I would get plantar fasciitis was seemed to be a low threshold for developing plantar fasciitis when I introduced these vegetables and plants back in. So after doing about 4 or 5 times and having confirmation each time, I decided that I was probably going to be carnivore for life, zero carb. And all along, I had been eating fermented foods. I learned about fermented foods when I went paleo. And so I do long ferments where I ferment my own vegetables and any ferments that I buy. I make sure that they're adequately fermented to eliminate the carbohydrates. And I maintained my consumption and use of ferment. So I differ than a lot of carnivore physicians who are purists in this area, where they are more strictly animal products only and don't eat any vegetables, fermented or not. I do, and my basis for doing so is because one, the carbohydrates have been reduced or eliminated completely to the extent that fermentation has eliminated them, and based on to the extent of the conditions of fermentation. So if it's a short fermentation, you may have residual carbohydrates, but a longer fermentation will eliminate that.
Are you more concerned about the carbs or the anti-nutrients in them?
I would say both. That's a great question. I've never had that question posed to me, but I've asked it of myself, and I really don't know. From my own experience, I think they're both bad players. I really do. I think, based on my own anecdotal experience, and then within myself, and then with my clients that I work with, patients that I get them off of carbohydrates and get them off plants and have them just eating fermented vegetables, fermented fruit and vegetables. I have not been able to confidently say which of the two is more problematic.
Is there a postprandial glucose response from a fermented carbs? Is that what your problem is?
Not really. If it's adequately fermented,
right. What's the issue with the carbs then? What would be the besides the anti-nutrients?
There aren't, from my perspective, if they're adopting fermented sources of plants and fruit. I'm speaking from the experience of people that who may be eating vegetables. Maybe they're eating more of a keto diet, and what is causing those people that are maybe eating plants and fruit. What is the greater harm to their body? Is it the carbohydrates, just like you say, or is it the lectins and the anti-nutrients in it? You know what's exciting is I just think that we're in the early stage of studying these things, and I don't think there's adequate funding. There's not a lot of importance attached to those kind of questions, but the more those questions are asked and the more people want to know, the voting population out there can, through Congress and your elected leadership, ask for more studies through, NIH and the government. So much of the funding for science comes from the U.S. government. And so it all got started with me from funding from the National Science Foundation. And I think we need to have more studies to get at that. But I still don't know if carbohydrates or anti-nutrients are a bigger problem. I do believe, and I've seen anecdotally, that when they are both eliminated from the diets of people, they optimize. And when they're reintroduced, they typically cause a problem. And, there are people that are able to ostensibly report that they have not had any problems. I know currently there's a movement within the carnivore community to reintroduce fruit and honey back in many cases. And it seems like a fairly large number of people report that they're able to do that without any noticeable consequence. I wonder, I always say, well, how do you know? What are you measuring? And a lot of them seem to be going on feeling that they feel better, which is always a scary thing because I think we have this proclivity or a tendency to want to feel good. And so I think that belies a lot of the attraction and distraction where people end up going into gambling, substance abuse, maybe pornography, and these might be criticized. Some people might be saying it's not really fair to talk about those vices in the context of fruit, but the same kind of attraction, the allurement of these pleasurable kind of activities, and you got to admit that most of those kind of vices, that if we are honest enough to identify them as vices, most of them are experienced in the lives of people as attraction, so allurement. And so I do think that things that taste good, unfortunately, can be alluring to people. And I like to educate my clients about the sense of taste being better utilized for the purposes of avoiding toxins and things that might be problematic, something that might be, for instance, spoiled. I think sugar or something sweet might have an advantage if we have no access to meat and healthy meat, then something sweet that is growing tends to be, if they're correct, there has not been anything sweet tasting that grows that has a toxin that will kill you immediately. But the thing about toxins are the dose makes the toxin. How much the amount of the toxin that you encounter really establishes whether it's going to be harmful to you or not. So an interesting thought that I've had recently kind of growing within me is that maybe plants serve a purpose as kind of a stress hormetic.
That's the side I'm on right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that might be the case, that we should be using plants and including fruit. Probably less the case with fruit because I think there appears to be less of the toxins and plant defenses within within fruit than they are in vegetables. But I think plants do have some benefit. Clearly, they have some benefit. The analysis goes, is it worth? Are the risk-benefit analysis collectively worth a use of and ingestion of plants and vegetables? And if so, then how frequently? Mm-hmm. I think that is elusive, and probably the answer to that is it's going to be different for every individual.
Yeah,
and it's going to be probably established based on the microbiome, the collection of microbes that reside within your gastrointestinal tract and even on your body. These microbes, and probably not us, are making the decisions about whether we're going to get a healthy response to a dietary strategy that changes. And so the microbiome is hugely important to me, and I think it's a topic that you and I could just have a podcast and do it every single day.
I want to briefly get into that because I want to take a minute to share something with you as we take a break from the video you're watching. One of the most common things I see to why people don't have enough energy levels, they have trouble building lean muscle mass, they have brain fog, fatigue, and they don't feel good is because of a deficiency in a hormone called testosterone. Now, testosterone is a very important hormone to have in a healthy amount for both men and for women. So how do you reclaim your vitality? How do you reclaim this very important fat burning and muscle building hormone? Well, you can do it with a powerful supplement called Upgraded Tea. It has been my go-to for naturally elevating testosterone levels. Upgraded Tea is from Upgraded Formulas, and it contains the highest quality of ingredients that have been proven scientifically to increase testosterone production. Now, as I mentioned, if you're a woman watching this is very important for you just as a man watching this right now. Upgraded Tea is a natural and safe way to boost testosterone levels. When you boost testosterone levels, it's going to increase your sex drive, vitality. It could help replace fatigue with all-day energy. It'll help you lose that stubborn belly fat. Testosterone is required for fat burning, so it'll help you with the last 5 to 10 pounds that you're looking to lose. It helps you be in a better mood, helps with your memory and focus. So here's the 3-step approach. Step 1, take 2 capsules of Upgraded Tea with water every morning. It does not break your fast. You can have it with food or without food. Step number 2, notice your energy levels and dominate your day with more confidence and more vitality. Step number 3, wake up the next day having better sleep and just keep doing what you're doing. As simple as that. So if you want to get your hands on Upgraded Formulas, Upgraded Tea, and any of their awesome products like their upgraded magnesium and their hair mineral analysis testing kit, head over to upgradedformulas.com. And if you use the coupon code ketosis at checkout, they're going to give you 15% off your entire order. That is upgradedformulas.com. Ketosis at checkout. We're going to drop that link down below. And let's get back to today's video. From the studies out there on the gut microbiome, when we compile them, diversity is the key, right? At least that's what I have found. But then I have interviewed like Dr. Terry Wahls, and she now kind of questions if diversity is the key. But I still believe the more diverse that gut microbiome, the healthier we're going to be based off of what I've seen. I want to hear your thoughts on that, number one. And then the follow-up on that, if somebody is carnivore, strict carnivore for 20 years, 30 years, wouldn't it make sense that they would lose the diversity if they're eating the same 5 or 10 foods? They're not changing their foods around. Wouldn't it decrease the diversity in their gut?
Yeah. So the first question, I generally think that a healthy microbiome is a diverse one. And I think the reason for that is because if you study human behavior, so much of our drive and interest in doing things is about collecting microbes. So for instance, within the realm of athletics, you see different athletes, when somebody does something really good, they'll go up and chest bump each other or high five each other. And we see this also in schoolyards, small little athletic achievements, and kids will be high fiving each other. And that's really on a primal level, nothing more than human behavior trying to harvest microbes from high performers.
Interesting. I never thought about that. That is fascinating.
Yeah. So I've watched humans and how they behave, and it's a universal action that's present around the globe. It's very interesting for excellence. And then the opposite is somebody misses a layup, something, cringy, you move away and don't want them. And we also see this in shaking hands and friendly behavior.
My dog was licking you earlier today.
Yeah. So this one smells good. I want some of their microbes. And then if you watch like in stadiums, very interesting, the people that are watching their team, these excellent players, high performers, they reaching their hands out just to touch them. They want to grit their microbes. So watching this human behavior, we are on this mission, whether we're aware of it on a conscious level, to try to collect as many beneficial microbes as possible. So I think the premise is from the outset that we want a healthy diversity, that we don't want to just have a collection of microbes that are in one particular area and isolated and not well developed. So, however, it still remains to be seen the different speciations of microbes. We're doing very early work in this, and I've had a few analysis of my own microbiome, gastrointestinal microbiome. And
with which labs did you do?
I used American Gut Project, which unfortunately I think is still down. They were early on a big player, and you can Google them, but it seems like since COVID, they've kind of diverted and are not really doing microbiome analysis. So there's another company called Tend Health, TEND space health. I don't have any financial interest in them, but I like them because they do microbiome analysis, but they don't sell supplements. So there's a lot of microbiome analysis out there, and then they try to sell you buy our supplements.
Yeah, this will help increase your diversity. Take this,
exactly.
eat and then eat these foods.
So Tend Health just does the analysis, but they're not selling. They sell the analysis, and I don't fault them because I think it's a good service. Not that you can't do things for free, but so when I had I was a little behind. I bought 5 kits for my wife and my children, and a few clients, and I had some problems with my registration on my computer to get it connected. So my wife's and daughter's report came back, and it was very interesting to go through. And then a couple weeks later, mine came back, and I got a message from the CEO was asking me if I would have a conversation with their chief scientific officer, their CSO.
Did he give you any reference?
Very interested in my results. So it turns out.
Did they tell you why in that email? What were you thinking?
Well, I ended up having a conversation with them, and I had one of the healthiest microbiomes that they've ever seen. So it was affirming. I mean, it's nice when you are passionate about the microbiome and you're trying yourself very hard to optimize your microbiome and share the advantages of an optimized microbiome with your clients. It's nice to get that kind of objective feedback that you have done well. And so,
how many years into carnivore and with the fermented foods did you take this test?
Well, I've been doing fermented foods since 2009, 2010.
Okay. And
so carnivore about 2018, 2019, the whole time fermented foods. And so I just noticed a steady improvement in my own health. And I like to tell people, despite the fact that you may be growing older, and the very common observation that is out there that as you grow older, you grow worse, you become more diseased and less capable. I think the truth is, and I stand behind it, and I like to promote this, that it is only the case because chronic disease is around, and we've lost our insights ancestrally how we should be living. And so the older people tend to be less revered and relative to how they were in the past. Monarchy, if you've never thought about this, monarchy got its start from the fact they were the best appearing and best performing of our species. And so we entrusted to them positions of extreme importance. because these men and women lived extraordinarily disciplined lives. Now, today, the monarchy, I would love to have a conversation with King Charles and Prince William about this. I think they have completely lost sight of the fact that they should really be incredibly disciplined, hardworking, human beings that on a daily basis throughout the day are making informed decisions to optimize their health. But that's how our ancestors did. They realized that the more closer they came to choosing and making decisions throughout the day, the better performing they were. And they did it not to be selfish. They did it because of their role in the clan. They knew if they were the best performer and they could get better, they were going to be more successful in catching a bison or a megafauna to share with their tribe. So it was this selfless desire to lead well, and unfortunately, right with the fallacy of humanity and starting to plant things and accumulate food and abundance and start accumulating money. There was a decline in health, and across the board, I think we've lost sight of our excellence to want to lead well. And so I'd like to see, and I'm going to remain optimistic that for our species, that as we become more optimally healthy, I think we'll see a resurgence or a return to just excellence in leadership. I would like to see basically leaders of governments and the modern day versions of clans and tribes become committed to and passionate about optimizing their health to be better examples for their people, and to inspire them that, hey, when I got healthy and really became, optimally healthy, I performed better and I served better. And to make that attraction, the notion of creating role models for health, I think, is something that we should be pursuing as a species.
Yeah, well said. I love that view. And yeah, I kind of saw that, and this is not a political statement I'm going to share here, but I kind of saw that with Robert Kennedy Jr. He made a post about doing push-ups, and he's, of course, running for the president. I like to see that, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whatever it is. I like to see a candidate focus on health and talk about the value of that. To your point, that is very admirable. Are you ready? Are you ready to talk about visceral fat and take a deep dive with me? Okay. Yeah. We have some photos here. So let's see. I'm going to pull it up on my phone, but we're going to show it on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, Dr. Sean is going to explain it in a way where you understand it. But I do recommend you go on youtube.com/ketocamp and watch it. So where do you want me to start here? Which one should we start with?
Probably start with there's a figure where it shows level of a scan. I'll pull it up here so you can put that in. This image shows right there.
And you've done over 6,000 scans.
Yes. Oh, yeah. For the National Science Foundation, we scanned over 6,000, and I've lost track now since the years of that. But that image is helpful for the audience to know where is visceral fat, and it also shows in color form the difference between visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. So in this particular image that you'll be able to take a look at, you can see that we take a slice typically through what's called an axial image, or through the axis of somebody's abdomen. And it's really a series of slices. So it kind of almost looks like a pizza that when it's processed by imagery through an MRI, which uses magnetic fields and doesn't use radiation. And on an MRI, fat shows up as white. So you're able to see fat within the human body, and organs and tissue and bones show up as dark. So it's helpful to be able to differentiate between the tissues.
And visceral and subcutaneous are both white.
Yeah, so both of them are white. Okay. And so the way to tell the difference is really the location of it. So subcutaneous gives you a big hint. Below cutaneous, skin. So right below the skin is this fat depot that is called subcutaneous fat.
Oh, there goes
And,
the dog.
And so subcutaneous fat is really a completely different animal to visceral fat. But as it turns out, and this is the exciting thing is, I've been aware of subcutaneous fat for a long period of time. I didn't realize there's actually two types of subcutaneous fat. And so on a MRI, looking at the abdominal image, there is two components to subcutaneous fat. One is superficial subcutaneous fat, and the other one is deep subcutaneous fat. And very interesting. I mean, I'm just fascinated that the two are separated by a membrane called scarpa fascia. And you can see this black line that goes through these, through the subcutaneous fat depot collectively. And everything that is superficial, just below the skin to that black line is the superficial subcutaneous fat. And then what is in the deeper part of it, of that black line, is deep subcutaneous fat. And why that is important, not only, nature decides to distinguish it with this membrane between the two, that for years I kind of ignored, is the fact that deep subcutaneous fat releases inflammatory molecules very similar to visceral fat. And so it is inflammatory in nature, and it's aligned with chronic disease, a higher amount of cardiovascular disease. So the big players like heart attacks and strokes that are responsible for killing people and causing serious morbidity and impairing quality of life. But its sister compartment, superficial subcutaneous fat, which is very close, but to it, proximally speaking, but separated by this membrane. Superficial subcutaneous fat actually does not secrete these inflammatory molecules, and then it secretes a very interesting molecule called adiponectin. Adiponectin is something that it's included in a lot of labs now, and I'm glad to see it. But adiponectin, to the extent that it is present and measurable, the more you have of it, the lower your risk for cardiovascular disease. So basically, I like to say subcutaneous fat and deep subcutaneous fat, even though they're buttressed up against each other, are completely different. It's like bricks and clouds. And yet, this physician, MD, only, and I've been studying fat for a long time. I only learned about this really this past year. And, why this, distinction is kept from us in medical school is elusive and problematic. I think, we really should be focusing in on having some of this superficial subcutaneous fat and having little to no deep subcutaneous fat, because it's just like visceral fat. And so you got bodybuilders that are out there trying to get rid of their superficial, all their subcutaneous fat to look more cut. And I'm critical of bodybuilders for that. I think it's a legitimate sport, but I would say for those listening in the audience, you don't want to have body fat down that low, because you're losing out on the advantage of adiponectin and superficial subcutaneous fat, which is also aligned with a lower amount of mortality and better quality of life. So there's this protective benefit to superficial subcutaneous fat. So
that would explain, by the way, why bodybuilders live a shorter life than the average person.
Yes, I think that is very much the case. And so I'm interested in body dysmorphia, and I am critical of bodybuilding from that standpoint. I think there is a dysmorphic quality to bodybuilding where you have too much muscle, too little fat, and then there's a continuum of that is probably worth mentioning at the same time, although people probably won't like thinking about it, is anorexia. So where you have too little fat and too little muscle, you just have no tissue, and then you have morbid obesity, where people who have too much fat and probably not enough muscle. And so what I like to say, to my clients is you probably want to be more like Tarzan and Jane of old. Back in the days, I'm 60 years old. When I was a young kid, Tarzan looked very different back then than he does today. Tarzan today has a six-pack. Tarzan of the day gone by, when Sean
I gotta
O'Mara
look
was
this
young.
up. I gotta go.
Yeah,
Keep going. I'm gonna
Johnny
look this
Weissmuller was Tarzan for a long time. He had a layer of subcutaneous fat on his abdomen. He did not have a six-pack. So Tarzan and Jane just look different than they do today. So there's this promotional shift now to what looks good, or culturally, and we think it's a six-pack. And for you to have a six-pack, you gotta be devoid of your superficial subcutaneous fat depot, which is creating your adiponectin. And I'll make a pitch that not only do you lose your adiponectin, but I think it also says I got a thin layer of extra reserve. I'm not living on the edge where I'm just a little bit away from starting to have to break down my muscle if I don't get any intake. So I think there was some attraction to having a small amount of little excess. Like, hey, I'm good at honey, and you can see it because I got a little bit on my abdomen. And if you're gonna wear fat on your body and have it, then you probably want just a thin layer of superficial fat, and you definitely don't want to have deep subcutaneous fat, and you definitely don't want to have visceral fat. And interesting, I'll share with you, is the deep subcutaneous fat tends to be concentrated in one area of the body, and that is posteriorly in your back, in a unique area called your love handles. So love handles are predominantly in the realm of typically about 80 to 90% deep subcutaneous fat. So
Why do they call them love handles if people hate them?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is men have a higher degree of deep subcutaneous fat in their love handles, and women less so. So what's interesting is I think us males in our species are more troubled over biologically. We react more viscerally to love handles than women do. If we're walking behind a woman and she has deep love handles on the beach, we're not as bothered about it as some dude in front of us with love handles. And then we think to ourselves, I don't want to be like that. I don't want love handles. And so when I was researching deep subcutaneous fat, Ben, I actually saw a number of posts, and I hope you go on the Google and you take a look at this. There were a lot of ads that kept popping up from plastic surgeons. And guess who are they chopping these things off of? Guys.
Yeah, that's
it wasn't the women that was getting removed; it was guys. And so we males don't want to have these love handles, but they are very much aligned with causing inflammation, and they correspond to the amount of visceral fat you have. So in that image, the visceral fat is in the center part of the abdomen. And the extent to which you have visceral fat, you are going to have deep subcutaneous fat. The two are, inextricably connected. And I will say that the process that causes deposition of visceral fat ends up causing development and deposition of deep subcutaneous fat. So there's a lot of complexity into how the body decides and reacts to the lifestyle of a particular species in laying down this fat. But for sure, you don't want to have visceral fat, and you don't want to have deep subcutaneous fat.
So that's an easy task to do at home. If you don't go get a scan, you probably should get a scan. But if you're at home and you reach behind and you have love handles, it correlates to having visceral fat.
Yeah, it's a poor man's MRI, I like to say.
It's a poor man's MRI. The MRI, are you referring to a DEXA scan? Is that sufficient, or is it something else that you recommend?
Yeah, so a DEXA scan is even a more affordable way relative to an MRI. And DEXA scan will give you a fairly accurate quantification of visceral fat. But the sad thing about a DEXA scan is, maybe I could pull up one more image and take a look at...
Show me which one. We'll pull it up on the YouTube.
Oh, this image right here, Ben, shows an MRI with a lot of white inside. So when you do a
So
an
this is
MRI,
this is a lot of visceral
it
fat I'm
is.
looking at right here.
So real quick, people you want to see, when it comes to abdomen, a lot of dark stuff. You want to see a lot of muscle, and you don't want to see a lot of white. So when you see a lot of white in there, it's visceral fat. And the reason why I pulled up that image is because that gentleman was filled with visceral fat, and we showed him images of your abdomen, what you want to look like, very low visceral fat and lots of muscle inside. And we showed him bad images with a lot of visceral fat, which shows up as a lot of white inside with very little dark muscles. And, the more visceral fat you have and the longer you have it, the smaller your muscles become. You start developing sarcopenia. So in that particular case, that individual, when we pulled up his scan, actually passed out. He was standing up, and he literally went unconscious, fell down, hit the ground. It was super scary, but he was so bothered by his own MRI image showing the amount of visceral fat inside of him. So I tell that story because nobody's going to pass out from their DEXA scan. Nobody passes out from their laboratory numbers. The capacity for a human being to be impacted by numerical data is very, very minimal. We are creatures with senses, and to the extent that we process information through visually, through touch, through taste, through smell, through hearing, all the senses, the information becomes more meaningful and impactful. So if you're listening today and you're trying to understand and more importantly, change your life with regard to visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fat, and another fat we'll hopefully talk about, muscle fat, then you want to have that engagement through your senses. You want to see that. So I like to say, to stare at the enemy inside. It's better to look at the enemy directly that you're confronted by than to get information through numeric quantification. So the DEXA scan will give you an accurate number, but the number is not going to really help you as much make the necessary changes to optimize your health. And so if you're going to track optimization, actually becoming more healthy, and you're thinking about maybe changing a dietary strategy, like maybe you want to add back in fruit or vegetables or honey, or in the case of what I recently did, a reel on lactose milk,
even raw milk too.
Yeah,
Yep.
You can track the impact of these dietary strategies, just like we did for our studies with the National Science Foundation, and you could see what sort of impact it has. So some people will be able to tolerate some of these things, again, based on their microbiome. Others will not, and they'll start quickly accumulating visceral fat. And for those people, they are at an advantage for having gotten the MRI scan to have that kind of an insight, rather than waiting for the long-term effect where maybe you start gaining a lot of weight and you can't wear your pants anymore and things like that. We could see the accumulation of visceral fat literally in just 2 or 3 days on an MRI scan.
Really?
Where people would add in carbohydrates, rice, or
2 or 3 days. You
Yeah.
can see it. So where is my audience going? How are they Googling this to find an MRI scan? What's the term they're searching for?
Yeah. So one thing I tell them to do is, follow me on YouTube, because I have some videos.
Got some amazing video. Everybody follow Dr. Sean on YouTube.
Well,
We're going to put
thank you,
that
Ben.
link down below. It's really great. I had fun watching all your videos preparing for today. It's like you got the graphics, you break it down. It's really well done.
Yeah, I'm a little zany. I mean, I tend to be in my stuff. I'm a little jazzed when I do it, but I try to keep it entertaining and engaging. But I go through videos how to read your visceral fat so you can study it. But to your question, Ben, you need to get a physician order to get an MRI. So I direct people to go back to their primary care doctor to ask them to sign an order. And they won't do it unless you pay out of pocket. So don't expect insurance to pay for this. Insurance company will never pay for an MRI. They don't like to pay for MRIs if you even if you need surgery, but they're certainly not going to be paying for MRIs for preventive maintenance on a human being. So you're going to have to pay out of pocket, and
How much is that?
The prices vary between markets. I've seen it as low as $300 in California to the highest one I've seen in the market is in our state, Minnesota, where it gets as high as $2,900 for a single MRI
Really?
cash pay. So in my city, Minneapolis, we're pretty fortunate. We can do them for about $750. So you need to ask around and be a bit of a business person when you call and say, don't try to make up all your profit in one scan. I'll be coming back to track this.
Yeah, good idea.
To make sure I'm improving. So give me a deal so that I can keep coming back and do this multiple times. And I just like that. If you think it's too much money, ask yourself, how important is your health? I mean, really think about it. And your body is your most important physical asset. Nothing else you have or you will ever own or ever have will have as much of an impact on the quality of life that you have as your body. So spend your money on taking care of your body. Do spend the money on the MRI scan, because it's your highest ROI you're going to have in your life is based on your health. And your body, more than anything else, is going to define how much you will either enjoy or suffer every circumstance for the rest of your life. And I do mean suffer in some cases. People go on to contract, incurable, highly debilitating disease like cancer, and heart attacks and strokes. And our country is filled in the United States in nursing homes with stroke patients. And it's the one pathology I routinely and regularly tell people I never want to have, because it is, to me, laying in a nursing home in a bed wearing diapers, maybe not able to understand speech or maybe not able to talk. When my family members are coming to talk to me, I can't talk to them, or I can't understand when they tell me, we love you, and I don't have no idea what they're saying. That's a miserable existence.
Yeah. And
everybody listening today ought to have a stroke prevention plan in place where they understand exactly what they're doing to minimize themselves from having that. Otherwise, you better be prepared for the potential for that pathology, because it is the number one killer in the United States is atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, either heart attacks and strokes. So this isn't fear-mongering. This is reality. The conventional healthcare system is not warning people about this, except they're pushing hard statin drugs. And it just is not a meaningful preventive plan to keep you from having it. They just give you those medicines, and they're making a lot of money out of those statin drugs, which is the largest, most profitable class of pharmacologic drugs out there in the history of humanity. And yet I like to ask the question, who here has ever had a human being get started on a statin or, lower their cholesterol and said, boy, once I got my cholesterol under control, it changed my whole life.
Not one person.
Yeah, doesn't happen. But if you go keto, you cut out carbohydrates, you go carnivore, you start eating healthy, you eliminate processed foods, that's when you see this life-changing process happen in humans. And that's where I like to start. I mean, if we could just get people eating healthy, Ben, I think we're going to have far better results than big pharma or conventional healthcare can ever compete with. And that's the undying message that I have, that I'm trying to get people to start with their diets and eating healthy, and then build on the success of a healthy diet with other healthy lifestyle choices.
Yeah, well said. I'm with you 100%. How often should we be doing those MRI scans if we're changing our lifestyle? We want to see, and I know you said it takes only 2 to 3 days to notice a difference. So what's a realistic time frame?
Yeah, great question. So typically I like to rescan my clients at about 3 to 6 months. I have some clients that will do it once a month. I've had some clients do it every 2 weeks. The only downside to them is time. They they take to do a scan, MRI scan. Takes about 20 to 30 minutes to do it, and then the economic costs depending on where you're at. But, if rather than spending your money on a fancy car, I would tell you, sell your car if you have to. Go get a cheaper car.
Your car's not going to get you healthy.
Yeah, and go get these MRI scans, track your visceral fat, and watch what happens when improving your quality of life. And I think in the long run, you're going to make up for those costs on those MRI scans because you're going to start becoming more healthy, performing better. And if you're an influencer, if you run a company, you have clients that you deliver services to, they'll be more inclined to follow your advice based on how well you look and how well you perform. You're just going to sell better and be a better influencer. And so your economic return is going to be higher. And so people very often shudder at the cost of doing these MRIs. And I'll say, I'm trying so hard. I want to figure out how we can do a single slice MRI instead of having to do 10 or 20 slices. Really just in the future, I'd like to develop a protocol just with one single slice to do it faster and to do it cheaper. That's my commitment to humanity, is trying to stamp out chronic disease. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to get MRI scans and this fat biomarker, visceral fat, front and center into the minds of people so that they can track it. Because I always say nothing will improve a human being more than eliminating visceral fat. And every human being should be aware of that, but almost nobody is.
I love it. So I've never done one of these scans, and I just did like a Google search. I'm curious how much it costs for Florida, but here's my promise. I'm going to do one for myself.
Awesome.
And then we could do maybe a follow-up where you're actually reviewing my results.
Yeah, let's do it.
And
how cool the audience, your followers are going to love seeing Venezotti
me too.
inside. Yeah.
Selfishly, I want to do it. How much of this correlates to body fat percentage? I know body fat percentage is giving you total body fat percentage. It's not looking at what's visceral versus subcutaneous, but do you put any value on that? And if you do, what would be a good range for men to be in?
Yeah, so I try to be around 12% body fat. I think I think if you get below, into single digits as too little body fat percentage, if you get above 20%, I think you have too much. Women have a higher body fat percentage. They tend to lay down more subcutaneous fat, and in particular, more superficial subcutaneous fat. So and that's partly because the female reproductive cycle has a protective benefit to them. Their purpose from a species, now this is all speculation, we don't know for sure, but they have historically played a very significant role in child rearing. Males tend to be their contribution oftentimes is limited to just genetic contributions to the reproductive cycle, and not necessarily a significant contribution to child rearing as much as women. So nature wants women to live longer, and they front load them with a better quality of life until menopause. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're listening today, with the onset of menopause, things dramatically change for women, and for the worse. We see a dramatic uptake in visceral fat. And so visceral fat starts getting deposited more in women. And the interesting thing is, you can see the influence of visceral fat in people's faces. And women's faces change right at menopause for the worse. So if you simply go through your ancestors and take a look at your female ancestors, how their faces changed once they hit their 50s and hit menopause, the only way to describe it, and I like to wake people up, is they become ugly, unattractive. And I use that term to alarm women so that they can be aware, because most women do not want to become unattractive and become ugly. Then you're going to want to be aware of visceral fat. And it's likelihood of being significantly increased when you hit menopause. So one of my pictures, and maybe we could pull up that, is a picture of myself that at the age of 48, yeah, that one there. So at the age of 48, with glasses there, I have a pronounced amount of visceral fat. Now, I don't know for sure because at that time I didn't have an MRI scan, but we see this pretty routinely in people when they come in. I can see the influence of inflammation from visceral fat in their faces.
Well, that's good news, because when you walked in and saw me, you said I look healthy.
You did. I was like, yeah, Ben looks good in real life. You look good on in your production online, but when you see somebody in real life, you get better appreciation of that biomarker. But literally, when I walk down a shopping mall, I'm doing visceral fat calculations on people in their faces as they're walking by.
Your reticular activating system is all about like visceral fat. This guy,
yeah, that's what I'm looking at. I'm just, it's a skill set that I have. That
so if you looked at yourself when you were 48 years old here,
and then I eliminated my visceral fat, and that's my photograph at age 59 today. I'm 60, but
so much more healthier.
Yeah, and so when you eliminate visceral fat, it has a dramatic influence on your appearance. And so we look to people who look good and perform well to give us leadership and guide us. And we have software, I call it biological software, that says we want to pay attention to these people because they can help us live better. That's why we pay attention to them. And marketing has figured this out, including Big Pharma. So if you look at Big Pharma's commercials, the person taking the drugs is chubby, heavy. They look like everybody. But the person telling them, the doctor or the person, the smart person with glasses and the clipboard, the scientist about the drug, he or she is lean and more, better looking to offer that guidance. So we really do pay attention to people based on their appearance and their performance, and it should be hopefully a motivation for people to become as healthy as possible. So besides improving your quality of life, you want to be able to influence other people, help them to live better, help them to hunt better. And, when I'm quite a bit older than you, Ben, but when I was a young child, we used to go and visit the elderly in nursing homes. Now, this is just not done very much these days. And nursing home, whenever the door opens up, old people turn to look to see if somebody's coming to visit them. But the sad reality is visits don't happen as much and are as lengthy because the elderly today, I think, are so afflicted with chronic disease that young people don't seek out the advice of grandparents and great-grandparents as much because biologically they are so filled with disease. Those young minds are told, don't pay attention to this person. They can't help you. They have lived their life poorly. And it's not through any fault of the elderly. It is the system has led us to believe the wrong things about when it comes to being healthy. But if you are the opposite, you're that grandfather or great-grandmother that is healthy, the younger generation will flock to you and want to pay attention to you. And you want to be in their life. Especially your adult children's lives or your grandkids' lives, because who's going to give better advice to your offspring than yourself? And you've accumulated a lot of that, and we are being ripped off with the accumulation of knowledge and experience that is uniquely available to the elderly because of chronic disease is impairing their ability to pass that on. So from species standpoint, we have got to work within our species to get ourselves as healthy as possible so that we can continue to optimize. We have done very well, our ancestors in the past, in imparting that knowledge and helping every subsequent generation to improve and become better so that we are the definitive, primal apex species that roams the earth. But our existence, our survival is very much threatened. For the past I think it's been past 4 years, life expectancy is declining for the first time in the history of humanity. And that notwithstanding the fact that we have more medical advancements. And what's not being talked about is that we have never, as a species, had such a high amount of chronic disease as we do today. And so you have more human beings living at this point in time than all others combined, and you have the highest amount of disease present within all these individuals. And that's I think, a very bad situation that we got ourselves in as species. And so if you're listening today, I would charge you, as if you take your role in our species and part of humanity serious, that you should be electing to live the healthiest life that you can possibly live, so you can do your part to make healthy choices and healthy lifestyles as attractive as possible.
Yeah, well, beautifully said. We reached the part of the interview that I think everybody is the most excited about, because it's going to be about what are some tactical, practical ways to reduce belly fat, stubborn weight gain, weight loss resistance. So let's start right here. Dr. Sean has done 6,000 plus, maybe close to 10,000 scans looking at visceral fat. We already established how dangerous visceral fat is to contribute to chronic disease. What are the 5 most common contributors to visceral fat that you've seen over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really important to understand what are the big contributors, the negative influences, and cut those out so you can stop what I like to say is the gasoline on the fire. So there are some things you can do to reverse and do some positive things, but let's stop the negative things. So the first, foremost, biggest contributor of visceral fat, in my opinion, is processed foods, particularly processed carbohydrates. These simple carbohydrates, simple sugars, they go in and contribute very significantly to the deposition of visceral fat. Again, likely through the role of a microbiome. So some people literally could probably take cotton candy or processed foods and not have as much impact if they have a really optimized microbiome. But for the majority of people, your audience and people listening today, it is unlikely that they have an optimized microbiome that would permit that. And so processed foods is something we saw in the average individual 6,000 people when it was eliminated, had the most dramatic effect in improving and eliminating visceral fat. The second one...
Wait, before the second one, but do you think it was the reduction of the processed carbs that contributed to that result, or was it the reduction of the seed oils that are also in those processed
that's
foods?
a great question, and I've tried to answer that multiple times. In the study, we did not pay attention to that. It was...
okay.
That would be round 2. I'd love to have some studies and take a look at that.
Because they come packaged together, right?
They do. And so I think that is the difficulty, is how, I think it would be an unethical study, but, could you have a diet where you're consuming industrialized seed oils, processed seed oils without carbohydrates, and then adding in the carbohydrates and tracking the difference, and then eliminating the industrial seed oils, and have a whole series of these things. But I just don't think I could do that and look at somebody in their face and say, why don't we have you do these things?
Yeah, that would be pretty evil. Well, it's kind of a moot point, because if you remove processed foods, you're going to remove processed carbs and seed oils. So it takes care of both.
I think so. Yeah. There's a scan there. Maybe we should pull up there. It will show a picture. It's a series of scans. Shows 6 MRI images. And this is an individual who was 68 years old, and he eliminated those processed carbs from his diet. And that was the only thing he did, Ben. He did not exercise 1 minute.
And I see a big change here.
And over a period of 35 weeks, he went from a dad bod, where his belly was sticking out.
He had 5.6 pounds of visceral fat on week 1.
Yeah. Basically, when he got started on this
this
study,
we don't.
And
want
then by
bod.
week 35, he has an abdomen, a 6-pack like a collegiate swimmer.
Wow!
At the age of 68. So, and this, without doing any exercise. So I like to show all my client patients, these series of scans, and your audience hopefully will understand now the role that processed carbohydrates plays, processed foods, with visceral fat. And that image series, in my opinion, should be in every single health class in every school, elementary school, junior high and high school and college, and for God's sakes, in medical schools. So physicians in training and nurses, nursing schools, professional schools could understand the harmful effect processed foods have and the optimizing effect when they're eliminated from the diet. So processed foods is step number one. The second one would be eliminating stress. So stress in our lives has a very harmful effect on through the hormone cortisol with deposition and acceleration of visceral fat. So even if you are eating a healthy diet and you're exercising and you're otherwise living a healthy lifestyle, if you're experiencing stress, then your body is going to, and chronically, your body is going to start accumulating visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fat. So we would see this routinely. And so I like to tell people the analogy I give to stress in the older days would be too many lions and tigers around. They were a threat for us predators. And if we couldn't kill those lions and tigers, which is the challenge today, if you cannot solve the problems that are causing you the stress, then the answer might be migrating. You might have to migrate from an area, which i.e. means maybe getting a new job, maybe changing your environment or whatever it is that's caused you just got to get away from it. You can't solve the problem, you got to get away from it. But in many cases, our ancestors couldn't migrate and they couldn't kill the tigers. So what did they do? Well, an adaptive response is sprinting. So I advocate people to do maximum intensity exercise. Antelopes and other prey that are stressed out by lions and tigers milling around them will have a stress as well, but it's mitigated when those lions and tigers attack. And so you want to have a stressful response, eliminating or a physiological response to that stress by where you counter that cortisol with some kind of maximum intensity exercise. Way better to sprint than to jog. So you get a much better reduction in your cortisol and a much better lower influence of visceral fat accumulation if you do sprinting as opposed to jogging. The third one was alcohol. So alcohol has a negative contribution through metabolism and its effect on the liver, which we see accumulation of visceral fat. And so I routinely ask clients if they have disappointing results in the elimination of their visceral fat if they're drinking. Do they have some sort of a problem with drinking or they're still drinking? The fourth one is sleep. So people who have sleep impairment, who are waking up in the middle of the night, or they can't sleep, they can't initiate sleep. Maybe they have mechanical noises around or aircraft or something impairing the quality of sleep, will accumulate elevated amounts of visceral fat as well. And the fifth one is individuals that are engaged in durational exercise. So when it comes to exercise, there is a sweet spot, kind of a Goldilocks approach to exercise. Exercise as a stress hormetic. Hormesis is a process that which does not kill you, makes you stronger. So basically, the enlightened human being who's trying to live optimally, to have the highest quality of life, who wants to have the highest level of health, will leverage hormesis. A little bit of a stress, a high-intensity stress for a short period of time is the preferred recommendation, and we would see more benefit and the elimination of visceral fat. And when it comes to too much durational exercise, such as cycling. Now, I know a lot of people like to cycle, but if you cycle too much and for too long, or distance running too much and for too long, we see the accumulation of visceral fat. And probably what I would say is the resistance to the elimination of that visceral fat. So if you cut out processed carbs or cut out processed foods and you're eliminating the other things that would otherwise eliminate that visceral fat, we saw in these 6,000 people basically an impedance of that visceral fat being eliminated in the face of chronic exercise. So it's one of our strongest recommendations for our clients is to make sure that they eliminate their distance running and cycling, their durational exercise, and adopt maximum intensity exercise. So I'm of the opinion that the single best form of exercise throughout humanity is sprinting, and that nothing kept humans in the gene pool longer and improved quality of life more than how fast a human being could run. And so that's in a sprinting situation, not how far or how fast they could run for a very long period of time, but basically it's the sprint that defined your ability to evade a threat and a predator, and in my opinion, also favored the ability to hunt effectively. I think we hunted megafauna. It's the one example of an animal that we hunted completely to extinction. And so I think we had a preference, obviously, to eating large amounts of meat, and that probably sprinting was more favorable than to hunting megafauna than some sort of durational exercise or skill set. So those are the 5 things to eliminate. Ask yourself if you have them in your life. You should be working very hard to eliminate them so you can get your visceral fat eliminated as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
What a great list. That's where we start. You remove first. So number 1, remove the processed carbohydrates, which are usually packaged with seed oils. Number 2, master your stress. If it's your environment, clean up your environment. If it's a job you hate, find a way to love it or find something else to do. Number 3, alcohol, which is bad news to a lot of people. I haven't had a sip of alcohol in it's going to be 9 years this January.
Awesome, Ben. That's great.
Number 4 is sleep, which goes hand in hand with stress, but you're right, sleep is so critical. And number 5, just stop jogging. Yeah. Stop the endurance running. Yeah. I did fasted sprints this morning, so I feel good about that. All right, so lastly, as we wrap up the conversation, those are 5 things to stop doing that contribute to visceral fat, belly fat, unwanted fat. What are 5 things that we start doing to really ramp up the burning of the visceral fat?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is really beneficial to eliminating visceral fat is maximum intensity exercise, sprinting. Sprinting is my favorite. It's my favorite form of exercise. There's good science behind the messaging molecules called myokines, and another one that you can Google called LACPHE, LAC-PHE, which is actually a hybrid molecule combined with a combination of lactate and phenylalanine that are connected together. And in studies looking at LACPHE, that the highest amount of LACPHE was generated from sprinting, and the least amount in 10 forms of exercise was in distance running. And second in the list of exercise studied was weightlifting or resistance training. So basically the 2 things that I think are probably the most important to the species was how fast we could sprint and how well we could fight, either in killing prey or defending ourselves against predator threats. So sprinting and resistance training are very effective to help mitigate these bad fat depots, visceral fat in deep subcutaneous, your love handles, and fat in your muscle and fat in your organs. And then another favorite of mine is fasting. So fasting is a wonderful practice. It's known to have such benefits when it comes to autophagy, and autophagy is worthy of multiple podcasts, but at least we'll posit and suggest it, and I would recommend people Google it and fall in love with autophagy. It's a great practice.
And sprinting and high-intensity workouts also get you autophagy.
Exactly. They do. And so the extent that you can do these multiple strategies, you'll have even better benefit from autophagy. So we find clients that we get them in a practice of extended fasting, and like you did today, sprinting in a fasted state is a wonderful thing. So I exercise mostly in a fasted state.
Same.
And I do something I recommend. I get my clients, not all of them, but a number of them, I will get started in what's called fasting and feasting, where they will fast for a long period of time and then they feast for a long period of time. And during that feasting program, I have them not doing any exercise. They're basically just eating, they're procreating, they're having sex, they're relaxing, they're recovering. And then in the fasting state, that's when they're exercising. They're doing the saunas, they're doing cold plunges, they're doing weightlifting and sprinting, the hard, challenging things in a fasted state. And it works exceedingly well. So
you're prescribing sex for your patients.
I do. Sex is a really good health optimizing measure.
Yeah, so ladies, you can share,
benefits.
Or guys, share this with your wife.
Yeah. It's popular with the ladies. Women's libido improves, as so do men as they become more optimally healthy. So
of course, makes sense.
Women who lose their interest in libido through menopause can recover it as they eliminate their visceral fat, and it's a wonderful practice. It increases your oxytocin, which literally improves your health and also makes you a more effective human being. It all comes. Hormone. Yeah, it's just a wonderful hormone. So there's such great content that we've talked about, and I hope all these subjects become areas of interest that your audience, Googles and wants to read more about. Go into, AI and look at what AI is coming up with in a lot of this content too, and just develop an interest in optimizing your health. All these strategies really do have a tremendous benefit, and you should be excited if you're listening today, because very few people really are even trying to get healthy, much less trying to get optimally healthy. So the advantage that you and I have already experienced in optimizing our health has been so profound in our own lives, but it is very much available to everybody listening. And to the extent they get started on it, they get that benefit earlier than the others. And by the way, the majority, the masses, unfortunately, are circling the drain. They're just getting more and more chronic disease, becoming more burdened with it. Their quality of life is poor. And so it really becomes a differentiator within your species for those that the majority are getting more disease, and then the rare remnant who are optimizing their health, not just getting healthy, but really living to optimize it. You're going to stand out among your contemporaries, among your peers, the sooner and the more serious you get started on this.
Survival of the fittest.
Indeed.
I have to ask this question. We have a mutual friend, Dr. Paul Saladino, the carnivore MD.
Yeah,
I've had him on the show
guy.
a couple of times. Very smart guy.
Indeed.
He's, more of the philosophy of carbs are good for you now. He eats about 200, 300 grams of carbs a day. However, he does say that works for him. He's very active. However, the question is this. He told you to incorporate some raw honey. You had a discussion about raw honey, and you did it. You experimented. What did the raw honey do for you?
Yeah. So first of all, I didn't notice any improvement in terms of my energy. I didn't get a benefit. I was watching for it. It was tasty. It was very kind of exciting to have that raw honey. But one of the things I noticed happen was when I got exposed to the raw honey. Now this was me. My restless leg syndrome. My legs started kicking. It came back in within, I would say, probably a couple hours of exposure to honey.
Really?
Yeah. And so now I don't think Paul ever had restless leg syndrome, and I think the majority of people probably do not have it. But if you have that, and I see it very connected to hyperglycemia and sugar levels, and people that have probably insulin resistance and a disrupted metabolism, suboptimal metabolism. The other thing that I saw happen was my visible pulses. So I have with the elimination of my visceral fat, I saw the onset of my pulses became visible throughout my body. And I routinely look at them. I watch them after I sprint, after I exercise, when I go out in the sunshine.
Show an example to the YouTube, because you showed that to me before we hit record. For those listening, we're looking at Sean's bicep, and he has a visible pulse, meaning you could see the actual pulse.
And also, some people will have it up in their wrist. I also have it on my radial artery underneath this particular Yeah, so that is my brachial artery, but I also had in the other pointed area, my wrist, your radial artery courses underneath one is superficial veins.
Can you move this?
Yeah, superficial vessels in your wrist. But I've noticed the onset of visible pulses within a big one is just my aorta, my stomach
Really?
flashes when I lay down. My stomach flashes up just laying down.
Is this a bad thing?
No, it's a good thing because it just shows massive amount of blood going through. And really what I think it more shows just not only a massive amount of blood is the softening of my aorta. So deposition of fat happens in your muscles to include your skeletal muscles and your cardiac muscles. But the third type of muscle you have are smooth muscles in your arteries and veins. So all my arteries have gotten softer. I don't have this deposition of fat in my arteries. So I have this massive course of my abdomen and my iliacs, my femorals, my popliteals, and then my dorsalis pedis and posterior tibialis. And the big one is erectile functioning. So if you're listening today, a healthy erection is not just a very hard, firm erection, but really an erection that throbs.
Yeah.
You should have a noticeable pulse to your erection for males. And every male, I think it's safe to say, when they were a teenager had this.
Yeah.
And this slowly goes away. And we don't track it. And then the only thing we really notice is when we can't get an erection anymore. But what you really want to have is an erection that throbs. And it should be very noticeable and very pronounced. And the more it does it, the better your blood flow and the less you have probably of deposition within the smooth muscles of your arteries and veins, and your capillaries. A large role where the capillaries play, where the nutrients are offloaded. So visible pulsations, I think, are really interesting.
Yeah, I have a
marker
follow-up
for health.
I have a follow-up question on that because, hey, I want to just briefly interrupt the video you're watching to share something with you. One of my favorite companies that I use for health and longevity and biohacking is a company called BondCharge. And they have a whole range of incredible products, including the blue light blocking glasses you see me wear right now. But one of my favorite products from them is an infrared sauna blanket. That's right. You don't have to spend a ton of money investing in a sauna or spending so much time driving to a facility with the sauna. They actually created a sauna blanket that you could use in the comfort of your own home. And I use this all the time. Why would we want to even do a sauna? Well, there's a lot of research and a lot of studies showing the benefits of infrared sauna. The sauna blanket works by raising your heart rate to a workout or a training session. So you burn more calories while you're actually lying down and relaxing. You could burn up to 600 calories in one single session. Also, it's going to cause you to sweat. And one method of flushing out toxins from your body is through sweat. There's also one of my favorite benefits, this endorphin rush you get from using a sauna blanket. And every time I get out of the sauna blanket, I feel like I just got a 60-minute massage. And that's because of the endorphin benefit from it. So how this works differently than a regular sauna is that it works by using infrared light, which heats the body directly rather than the air around you like a traditional sauna. This means you get the same benefit at a lower heat. So it's easy to set up. It's super convenient. 30 to 40 minutes will suffice in terms of the length of the sessions. And you do that 2 to 3 times a week, you're going to feel amazing. Add that to your keto fasting protocol and watch what it does for your results. You could do it while you watch TV. You could do it while you read a book. I do it while I listen to an audiobook. So if you want to learn more about the BondCharge products, including the sauna blanket, head over to bondcharge.com/KetoCamp. And if you use the coupon code KetoCamp at checkout, you'll get 15% off your sauna blanket. And actually, any of their products are 15% off with that code. BondCharge hooked you up. So head over to that domain or click the link down below and go get your BondCharge products. All right, let's get back to today's video. I remember I would wake up in the middle of the night. Maybe I would have my arm like over this. I would be sleeping and I would get like this visible pulsation. And I would think it was a bad thing. Like, am I something wrong here? And it would actually pulsate here. And then sometimes right here, like by my armpit area. But I noticed that it would happen usually Sunday nights. And the significance of that is that Sundays is when I play 2 hours of fasted basketball outside, outdoors. And it usually happened that night that I would go to sleep Sunday nights, not typically the other night. So is there a connection there?
Well, there could be. I mean, if you're playing it outdoors and you're exposed to sunshine, then the nitric oxide production of the sun exposure and just your increased levels of testosterone that you get from one, exercise, and two, competing. So
and I do compete.
You don't want to just go and lift weights or go play basketball by yourself. You want to race or sprint or play some kind of athletic event against somebody else. So the trifecta of testosterone and nitric oxide and the lac and myokines and from exercise all came together to improve. And that's what we see. You know, the amplitude of visible pulses are enhanced and increased when you do healthier things. And so routinely, clients, we have a client group. My clients are all part of an online community. And whenever somebody starts getting visible pulses, they jump in and say, "Yeah, I got the visible pulses." They're starting. And then so it's just an exciting thing to track and pay attention to. So rather than paying so much attention to your bathroom scale or your lipids, your cholesterol panel, pay attention to your body and looking for signs and indications that you're perfusing blood well, that you have healthier arteries because you see the onset of these visible pulses. And if you have them today, make sure you don't lose them. And so when I ate that honey, my pulses went away. And that was the unfortunate thing. That concerned me.
Did you measure your visceral fat with the honey at all?
I did not.
Okay.
I just did 2 episodes about 12 days, 10 to 12 days apart from both of those. I did not bother doing an MRI at the time. And if I'd stayed with honey longer, I probably would have done that. In fact, down the road, that might be an interesting experiment to take a look at. But you know, if you're listening today and you're thinking about adding in fruit or honey or milk or some other thing, you know, consider doing an MRI at baseline and tracking. And then I'd love to have your scans, and I'm sure Ben would too. We would promote, you know, what would happen when you put this on. And you know, it's an N of 1. The fact that either you developed visceral fat or you didn't doesn't mean that everybody else will have the same results, but at least is one experience. And I think we really need to do more studies. I am intrigued about fruits. I think they are, and honey, they are something that are worthy of being considered. But I think for the, you know, a lot of people that are coming from an overweight condition or experience where maybe their metabolism is suboptimal, their microbiome is very likely compromised. They need to be very careful and cautious about adding in those carbohydrates, in my opinion, and work on restoring their metabolic health and their microbiome before they do so. I've had a few clients do it and quickly abandon it even before we could even do an MRI to track it because they so quickly gained weight.
Yeah.
And but you know, for those listening, I'm not slamming the practice. I'm just pointing out that every one of those people that I'm aware of always came from a background where they were formerly heavy. They had suboptimal microbiomes, suboptimal metabolisms, and that every individual that I've known that has incorporated, at least reportedly, you know, that they successfully incorporated honey and fruit into their carnivore, you know, previously low carbohydrate diet, have never had compromised periods of health. So it may just be that their microbiome permits them to add these carbohydrates back in. And so I think it remains to be seen in large population studies. But I would end on this note with regard to that point is the only study that really matters is the N of 1, what's happening in you.
Yeah.
So, you know, even if we could successfully study 1 billion people and say generally these are the expected results if you add in honey and fruit into your diet, previously a zero carbohydrate diet, it may not matter because your microbiome may be completely different, either where you can add them back in and it's not a problem, or in the alternative, you cannot add them back in because it is a problem, or you might be somewhere in between. So study yourself, follow these biomarkers. I call them key biological indicators to help optimize your biology. And they're just a fascinating way of taking a more enlightened approach about what's going on in your body and outside your body, so that you can be guided on how to better live your life.
Yeah. If you want to incorporate fruit and honey and do well, just go live with Paul Saladino for like 2 months, get his microbes, and maybe you could do it. No, but Doc, last thing, I talk a lot about gratitude and vitamin G, I call it. You know, I'm sure if we did some studies on vitamin G, it'll help with visceral fat because it helps with everything. So I want to ask you, what are you grateful for?
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for my family. My family is we have our own little chat room, and we uniformly regard our family as the greatest family in the world. I mean, and so we just love each other and
5 kids.
Chat all the time in our little chat room. And so I am most grateful for my family and the life that I get to live with them. So that is a forefront and center. What is and then my faith. My faith and my family are the two most important things.
Wonderful.
In my life.
I love it. Your website is drshawnO'Mara.com.
That's it.
That's your YouTube. It's also your Instagram. Anywhere else that you want them to go?
I'm also on X or Twitter. That's the same.
X, Twitter. Same handle
name.
There.
But I'm pretty easy to find in social media. And if you are somebody who's listening and are very motivated and interested in seeing what's going on in your body, you can go to my website, and I look for people to study who are willing to and able to cover the costs of MRIs. We no longer have any funding, from the National Science Foundation to do them for free. But if you're able to and are interested in becoming a client, I'd be happy to consider studying you and seeing how you're doing in this process called life.
I love it. There you go. We'll do round 2 where we'll review my scans. And thank you, Doc, for coming on the show. I appreciate you. I acknowledge you and how you serve and show up. And it's a really powerful message that I think is going to change many, many lives. So thank you. And we'll do this again very, very soon.
Well, thank you, Ben. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to do this again.
Thanks.